All right, welcome back. We're going to be looking at facial hair today, more specifically, the importance of facial hair for male facial aesthetics. We'll be discussing whether facial hair looks good or not, if it's attractive, unattractive, what makes good facial hair, what makes bad facial hair, whether or not you have good facial hair. So we'll have some self-identification in this video as well, which flaws facial hair conceals, how to get good, well-developed facial hair, when you should avoid facial hair, when you should try and get facial hair. So this will be a fully comprehensive guide and discussion on facial hair for male aesthetics. So by the end of this video, you'll completely understand everything that's important when it comes to facial hair and fitting the female gaze and not falling into the male gaze, which is a really common mistake with facial hair. This is going to be part of a big series where we're going to look at different parts of the male face and just give a really good comprehensive overview of that feature, aspect, proportion, its significance in male aesthetics, and also just to make sure that you know everything you need to know about it and what you can do yourself. So I'm giving this information to you completely for free, outlined nicely for you. This is actually a very small aspect of one of the many modules inside my course and private community where I'm helping a lot of guys systematically improve their looks. We all know that facial hair on men has sort of psychological, physical links to maturity. You look at someone with facial hair or a short beard. We know it's subconsciously linked with intelligence and masculinity. But we also know that just because someone's very masculine looking doesn't mean they're more attractive. We've already talked about this here. If you don't already know that, you can look at previous videos. So what makes good looking facial hair? Well, facial hair, like other regions of the face, has specific components that make it the way it looks. So when it comes to a component of the face, there are well over 150 components. And if you watch this channel, then you already know that. So with a component, you either have a golden feature or zone based on whether it's a feature or a proportion, or you have a flaw. So when it comes to a golden feature or a golden zone, you're looking at the ideal appearance of that component. And when it comes to a flaw, that would be the polar opposite. So an unideal appearance, unideal aspect. The first component of facial hair is density and uniformity. And of course, the golden feature for this is having dense, uniform looking facial hair. And the flaw, of course, would be patchy, sparse looking facial hair. The second component is color. And when it comes to facial hair, the darker, the better. So that would be the golden feature. And the flaw, it would be light colored facial hair, where there's a low contrast against the skin. The next is facial hair length. The golden feature for this is a stubble, anywhere from 2 to 5 millimeters, or a short beard, anywhere from 1 to 2 centimeters. The flaw for this component would be either too long, too short, too bushy, so anything out of the range just mentioned. So if too short, like a 5 o'clock shadow, this is typically unappealing in comparison to either a clean shaven look or a stubble. And when it comes to the stubble, this is more of a subtle look. You want to keep it short. And the short beard, anything longer, this is typically going to look really bushy and unappealing, very male gaze, and anything shorter than that 1 centimeter, if you're aiming for a short beard, it's just not going to be long enough. Okay, so the next component is facial hairstyle. And there's a lot of confusion with facial hairstyle. You see people with really super wacky, goofy styles. The golden feature for facial hairstyle is either the general stubble or beard. So this is facial hair covering every aspect of the face where it should be covered. And of course, we'll talk about trimming in a second, but anything other than that, where it's just not a standard general coverage over the face, or goatees or other non-standard styles, those are all male gaze styles and definitely not optimal when it comes to physical attraction. The next component is facial hair shaping. The golden feature for this is very simple. You just want to keep it natural looking with soft outlines. And when it comes to shaping, you should realistically only be tidying. And I'll get into that a little bit more later. The flaw for this would be hard, obvious lines and borders. Sort of the typical look that you get after going to a barber to get it done. It usually looks really overdone, a bit try hard and not very appealing. Clear, unnatural definition. The next component is the transition from the face to the neck. Now, this is really, really important. So the golden feature is there is a clear, visible separation between the beard and the neck, and the flaw would be no clear border. And the final component for facial hair is sideburns. And when it comes to sideburns, these can be used intentionally for an aesthetic reason, but that's the only way they should be used. So this is a golden feature when they're used intentionally, subtly, and they're not noticeable. So I'm not talking about these really comical, large sideburns. Obviously, they look terrible. You don't want to be doing that. If your sideburns are noticeable, then yeah, you're doing something wrong. So out of all of these components for facial hair, the most important is density. If you don't have good density, then it's sort of pointless to think about the rest of the components. All right, so hopefully by now you have done a bit of a self-identification for these specific components of facial hair. You should have a good idea whether or not your current facial hair, if you're watching this with facial hair, is optimal and is looking the best it possibly could. So now we're going to talk about the main flaws that facial hair can conceal. There's a typical saying that facial hair is the makeup for men. This is kind of true because it does conceal a lot of very important flaws and facial features, components, proportions for the male face. So let's go through these. And these aren't really in any particular order, but the first thing is acne scarring, eczema, acne, or any other miscellaneous skin issues. So obviously having almost like a masking or coating over the skin. If you have any of these issues, maybe you have acne on your cheeks, some eczema on your chin, doesn't really matter. But if you have well-developed facial hair, then this is going to be either concealed completely, depending on the density, of course, or just reduced significantly, taking away the perception of that. And this is really important because lack of skin clarity is a really big descending factor for appeal. We subconsciously associate skin issues with disease. So if you have any of these issues, you're currently working on reducing them, and you have the ability to grow very well developed facial hair, then that would be a really good concealment technique. Because when it comes to removing flaws, you can either conceal them, and this can either be long-term or short-term. In this case, you have acne on your cheeks or acne scarring on your cheeks. In the short term, you can conceal this acne or acne scarring whilst you work on reducing or removing that acne or acne scarring completely. A long-term concealment would be, for example, if you had a large forehead and you wanted to reduce the perceived size of the forehead, well, having hair coming down onto the forehead will permanently reduce that perceived size. There's not really any logical, realistic way to reduce forehead size. You could lower your hairline, but realistically, who's going to do that? The second thing is correcting, and this is when you're just essentially completely removing the flaw that you have. So in the case of acne, removing acne, that's correcting. And then there's balancing, which is changing the perception of a proportion. For example, if you have close-set eyes, having some hair on the outer region of the face reduces the total distance of the face and kind of murkies the water of the positioning of the eyes and sort of removes some of the relation with the other features and helps to make the eyes look less close set. I'll make a different video on eye spacing because it could have its own video 100%. I'm sort of going on a bit of a tangent here. And typically what I like to say is if you can't correct it, conceal it. Okay, so the next flaw that facial hair conceals or helps reduce is the philtrum length. So the philtrum length is one of the most important facial features on a male face for an attractive male face. Personally, I think it's not talked about enough. It's definitely overlooked. On mostly, if not all, attractive male faces, you'll always find a short philtrum or a philtrum that doesn't leave the golden zone in terms of length. I talk about this a lot in my videos, so I'm not really going to go into it too much, but having dense, well-developed facial hair, specifically the mustache region, is going to reduce the perception of your philtrum length. So if you have a long philtrum, then this is going to help to reduce that and significantly enhance your appeal. The next flaw also links in with the philtrum, and this is the relation between the chin and the philtrum. So when you have facial hair, it's going to enhance the chin to philtrum relation. This is a really important proportion for men. So it's going to shorten that philtrum and it's going to enlarge the chin region as well. And it's also going to make the chin seem slightly larger as well. So both of these things are very, very good. This will help to improve your perceived dimorphism. And if this is something that you're struggling with, which I'll talk about slightly later on in the video, then it's going to be very, very important for you. The next thing is reducing neoteny. And as I just mentioned, dimorphism, neoteny. I'll talk about this in a later chapter in the video. But yeah, it's going to help to reduce your neoteny. If you look juvenile, childlike, having well-developed facial hair will counter this very, very effectively. And in this series, I'll most likely make a completely separate video on neoteny and dimorphism. So the next flaw that it conceals is a mandible contour. If you're currently fat and bloated and have loose facial skin around your face, you don't have that tight, clear outline between the face and the neck, and there's not a clear contour of the mandible bone, then this is pretty unattractive. So if you have facial hair, it's going to reduce the severity of this lack of disconnect. And it can also increase or give the illusion of more of a disconnect between the face and the neck. The next flaw it can conceal is a chin or jaw that's just not big enough. So if you have a small chin or a small jaw, you may have already done measurements for this. But if you do have a small chin or jaw, having facial hair is going to help to increase this jaw size and chin size. When it comes to the mouth region, if you have a thin upper lip, a narrow mouth, or a overly wide mouth, facial hair will help to reduce the attention that this mouth draws. It does this by sort of, again, murking the waters. If you have an obviously unideal looking mouth region, facial hair will help to bring attention away from this mouth. Because when your mouth doesn't look good, it will tend to draw attention towards it. Something stands out, something doesn't feel right. People can notice this either subconsciously or consciously. So yeah, it helps a lot with that. If you have a very tall, pointy chin, facial hair will also help to reduce the perception of this pointiness and height. And you might be thinking, well, it increases the size of the chin, so why would it help with this? Well, in a few ways. So with having some facial hair coming down the mandible bone to the chin, it's going to help to make the frontal jaw angle look less acute by increasing the perception of this angle slightly. It will also help soften the sharp, pointy appearance of a tall, pointy chin. And also, if you think about where the facial hair grows, right? If you look at the soul patch region and you also look at having hair also on the chin above the tip of the chin, the very bottom of the chin. If you have some hair in between this distance between the lower lip and the tip of the chin, it will also help to reduce the perceived height of that chin as well. So lots of different ways that it can help with that. The next flaw is looking at the width of the mouth and the nose. It can kind of work in both ways with the mustache. So if you have a narrow mouth, having a mustache with horizontal emphasis, it will help to almost stretch the mouth a little bit wider and counter the narrowness of this mouth. And if you have a very wide mouth, you can also reduce the width of this mouth by slightly cutting off the end of the mouth as well with a stubble or a short beard. And in relation to this, it's going to help to reduce the perceived size of the nose as well. So if you currently have a wider nose, which is quite common, if you have a wider nose, then having this mustache will also reduce the perceived width of the nose as well. And finally, inside the community, there are a lot of older members. You know, we have members up to 50 years old. So typically I will recommend the older members to have either at least a stubble or a short beard, because it's very age appropriate for an older individual. So if you're watching this video and you're over the age of 30, the chances are you probably would really suit well-developed facial hair. If you're younger, you can still definitely suit facial hair, but this is just in the case of, if you're an older viewer, then yeah, having facial hair is definitely more age appropriate and will enhance your appeal significantly. And yeah, that's just a rule of thumb. You might not look good with it. Obviously, if you don't fit all the golden features for the facial hair, then it's just not going to look good. But if you do, then more often than not, you will look better with facial hair rather than a clean shaven look. And this sort of links in with our next chapter. And this is when facial hair will look good. So if you're thinking to yourself, okay, I don't currently have good facial hair, I want to try it. Well, firstly, I'll tell you exactly how to develop good facial hair. Even if you don't have good facial hair right now, that'll be later on in the video. So how do you know if facial hair would suit you? Well, firstly, if you have any of the flaws listed previously in the video, then most likely it will suit you. But the major appearance that facial hair helps with is neoteny and a hyper-feminine look. So a lot of guys struggle with having a juvenile looking or overly feminine looking face when it comes to the neoteny and a juvenile look. This is typically what people will call a baby face, right? So facial hair will really help to counter the appearance of hyperfemininity or neoteny. So how do you know if you have a hyperfeminine or a neotenous face? Well, so how do you know if you have a hyperfeminine or neotenous face? Well, the features for this typically go hand in hand. There are a few differences, of course. If you have sparse eyebrows or eyebrows that are thin and vertical height, they're high set. You have large, wide eyes, full, rounded cheeks, soft, rounded facial structure, a narrow jaw, longer hair, a smaller chin, small ears, a thin neck, and a small upper body with minimal muscle mass in the chest, lats or traps, and also sloped, rounded shoulders. And also if you have chin recession, then you most likely look more juvenile or hyperfeminine. A short beard will be really, really helpful to reduce the perception or completely remove any sort of visual of that chin recession. So having either a hyperfeminine or a neotenous appearance plus any of the previously mentioned flaws will most likely make you a good candidate for a well-developed stubble or short beard, depending on your age, of course. So when is it inappropriate to have facial hair, either a stubble or a short beard? So this is linking in with the common mistake when it comes to facial hair, and this is having a overly masculine, bushy, long beard or undergroomed stubble. And it's linking in with fitting in heavily into the male gaze. So if you have a hypermasculine look, then having facial hair is most likely going to tip you even further into the male gaze and much less appealing. So how do you know if you fit within the hypermasculine look? Well, typically guys that have a hypermasculine look will have thick, heavy looking eyebrows, short hair or maybe even a buzz cut, rough or coarse hair texture, rough or thin lips, cracked lips, more often than not, low eyelash visibility, rough or highly textured skin, so not smooth. So if you fit the picture for what I've just described, then most likely facial hair will not suit you at this current point. Of course, you can do lots of things to counter the hypermasculine look and grow facial hair if you want to. But if you do have any of those aspects currently, then facial hair would most likely hurt your appeal. So how do you develop good looking and well-developed facial hair? Well, simply minoxidil. And you can also use microneedling as well, as it's been proven to potentiate the effects of minoxidil. So here's how you do it. And of course, do your own research for what you put on your own body. This is just me suggesting and presenting an option that has worked for many people. So with any branded minoxidil of about 5% concentration, you can apply 1 milliliter twice daily. You want to try and leave this on for anywhere from 10 to 12 hours. You can use the liquid or foam, but typically the foam is preferred over the liquid because it's a lot easier to apply and causes less irritation on the skin. You want to avoid minoxidil that contains any DHT blockers, and make sure you're moisturizing anywhere from 1 to 2 times a day to combat the drying effect of minoxidil, because there's this myth that minoxidil will accelerate your aging, but in reality, what this is most likely due to is the drying effect of minoxidil and the alcohol in minoxidil, which will not only short-term make you look slightly older if you don't stay on top of it with proper moisturization, but also long-term, having this drying may also speed up the process of premature aging. So very important to stay on top of the moisturization. When it comes to microneedling, you can do this anywhere from once to 4 times a month. It's typically recommended to do once a week, anywhere from at around 0.5 millimeter of needle depth. And it's not essential, but it definitely will help to improve your results. And the big question is, well, is it permanent? The answer is yes. For most people, the majority of users for minoxidil for facial hair see permanent results, but you have to stick to it for at least a year for the vellus hairs all to transition to terminal hairs and become permanent. So it's not the same as the head hair where your progress will be removed if you stop. But most people see noticeable improvements around the 2 to 3 month mark. But there are differences in how people respond. You have non-responders, you have slow responders, you have fast responders. Some people may take up to 2 years, 3 years to see a very well-developed end result. You can see a lot of these transformations on Minox Beards on Reddit. Plenty of people showcasing these permanent improvements and results. But also, interestingly enough, people showcasing how if you stop too soon, so anything before a year, typically you will lose pretty much all of your progress. So it's very important to stay on it for at least a year if you are going down this minoxidil route. Some people like to taper off, so from going from twice a day down to once a day, down to a few times a week, once a week, and then stopping. There's not really any evidence to suggest that tapering off really does anything. I would personally say that it's worth doing. It makes sense. And if you are nearing towards the end of your application, maybe you're at like month 14 or something, or you're just happy with how it looks after the 12-month mark, then yeah, I would recommend tapering off slowly. There's no real way to do this. Just do it slowly and logically. And I would say over the course of around 2 to 3 months. So that's going to help with density, lack of uniformity, and also lightness of the hairs. It's going to help to darken the overall appearance of the facial hair, because terminal hairs are going to be darker and thicker and stronger than vellus hairs, which tend to be softer, shorter, and lighter. But on top of that, to help darken the beard even further, you can follow the phase 1 diet. This was previously mentioned in this video here. It's going to help to support melanin production, more specifically with the good amount of copper, iron, zinc, vitamin A, B12, and L-tyrosine that you're getting from the diet. But if you're looking for instant results, you can always go down the beard dye route. So that's the density, the coloring, the uniformity. So how do you shape, trim, and style your facial hair to make sure it's optimal looking? Well, if you're going for a stubble, again, just make sure it's in between 2 to 5 millimeters. You can use a specific guard for this. If you're coming down from a longer beard and you want to do a stubble, I'd recommend starting with the longest guard and just seeing how it looks, and then just working your way down. If you don't know how it looks and you want to know how it looks, this is one of the main benefits of being a member in the community. You can message me whenever you want and I'll give you good feedback. I'll let you know exactly the direction that you should be taking based on your unique facial structure and current appearance. If you're going for a short beard, well, anywhere from 1 to 2 centimeters, as previously mentioned. Avoid other goofy, suboptimal styles, and then stick to the general appearance, general beard / stubble. When it comes to shaping, don't shape the beard at all, just tidy it. And that means making sure there's no hairs riding too high on the cheek line, making sure that the mustache is well trimmed, well shaped, and there's not too much hair coming down onto the upper lip. And when it comes to the hair on the neck, removing this completely, use 1 or 2 fingers above the Adam's apple and trim up to that line and make sure that line follows all around towards the angle of the mandible. If you're genetically gifted and you are going down the clean shaven look, well, make sure you're using a single blade razor. Ditch the disposable multi-razor head shavers. They're rubbish. They're going to cause skin irritation, bumps, and razor burns, which are very unappealing. Use a single blade razor. Make sure the blade is very sharp. Use high-fat shaving cream and shave with the grain, so down, then to the side of the grain, so sideways. And then if you really want a super smooth look, then against the grain, so up. And obviously it's going to come down to technique as well. So the better you get, the less irritation you're going to get and the better you're going to look. There are plenty of really good tutorials on YouTube so you can watch how to properly do that. So here are some additional guidelines, pointers, notes that didn't really fit in the previous chapters. So for facial hair to actually look good, it needs to be well developed pretty much. If your facial hair isn't developed properly, I would definitely just do clean shaven. Poorly developed facial hair is very, very unappealing. Facial hair is definitely not essential, but if you can grow well-developed facial hair, the chances are you're probably going to be concealing a flaw or two and improving your appeal.